Greetings, everybody. I'm Larry Williams, the Director of CARMA, the Consortium for the Advancement of Research Methods and Analysis, now housed at Texas Tech University in the Rawls College of Business. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to another version of our CARMA chat. And today it's my pleasure to be chatting with Samantha Anderson, who is going to be our CARMA Webcast presenter next Friday, where she will be talking about power analysis issues and regression models. So Samantha, it's nice to meet you. Thanks for taking the time from your schedule to chat with us.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
So, you know, as I've been in the profession for a while, I've learned that people oftentimes take very circuitous or indirect routes to end up doing what they do. So how is it that you find yourself being a professor at Arizona State in the quantitative psychology? When did you know that? How did it happen?
I guess I took one of those circular routes to end up here. I started in clinical psychology in grad school. I was really interested in stress and depression. But I don't know, you sit in enough statistics and research methods courses and something just clicks. So I ended up just thinking over and over about the why. Why do we do these methods? Which methods are preferred? Why are there so many different options? And I guess I found myself just more and more wanting to be behind the scenes and thinking about the methods themselves rather than just like, oh, I need to do this analysis, which method will get me from point A to point B. So thankfully, I was at Notre Dame, and Notre Dame has a wonderful quant methods program. And I sort of just slowly transitioned on into quant and ended up here in sunny Arizona.
Yeah. Are you a Hoosier? Is that how you ended up at Notre Dame?
I don't know what that is.
That's somebody from Indiana. They were
right.
Hoosiers.
Right. I'm from the Midwest, so I grew up in Wisconsin.
Oh, okay.
So still Midwest. I'm more of a cheesehead, though. Like my Green Bay Packers. But Notre Dame was a wonderful place to spend those 5 years. Learned a lot there.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Indianapolis, so I'm always intrigued. If anybody has any connection to Indiana in any way, that's always a first follow-up types of question. So you do your graduate training there, and you start now and a couple years in as a faculty member. For people who've made that transition, I'm interested in there seems like there's always like, well, if I'd have known this, or they didn't tell me about that. So I just was curious whether there was anything that struck you in that regard.
Yeah, it's there's definitely been some on-the-job training that's happened. I think for me, I'm a perfectionist.
You could have gone into industrial organizational psychology using that terminology.
So, you know, I'm a perfectionist. I've always managed to just work harder or work longer so that I can give 180% to every single activity. And in grad school, I was still able to make that work. But as a faculty member, I think one of the things you learn is there are so many different things to juggle at the same time. And you will not get any sleep if you are still trying to give 180% to every single task you do. So I think for me, it's been learning about how to prioritize things, how to balance, how to schedule things so that I can move forward on research, teaching, and service. So that's definitely been a hard pill to swallow, but after a few years, you start to get used to it.
That's a good way to describe it. It can make you uncomfortable, but it is the reality of what you have to do. What types of courses do you teach?
So currently I teach our sort of research methods and introductory ANOVA course for our grad students. So I'm covering research design. I cover some topics on meta science and replication, and then we talk all things categorical data analysis. I also teach advanced statistics for undergraduates, where we focus on regression and ANOVA and various other topics. And I'm looking forward to teaching a whole course on meta science, hopefully soon, focusing on statistical power, meta-analysis, replication, all sorts of those kind of bigger picture issues.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly the case that a lot of those are coming into the forefront of social science discussions these days. We have made a commitment to supporting open science kinds of principles. We have a short course. We do CARMA short courses that are roughly 20 hours of content that are now online. So we have an open science short course that we do, and we have bundled it with some other activities, and it's co-sponsored by the Society for Industrial Organizational Psych. So it's good that you guys are involved with that. So in that evolution time that we've kind of been talking about, not only you come to think about what you were anticipating versus what turned out to be the reality, during all that time you were doing research. So how do you think you have evolved or changed or approached your craft of your research differently now that you have the experience that you have?
Well, good question. I think I'm still learning. And I think one of the reasons I picked this job is that I'll get to keep learning for several more decades on the job. But I think one of the things I'm thinking about in my research more is making my studies more realistic to what researchers with applied data are dealing with. I think as quant folks, sometimes we run these simulations that are highly specialized and highly particular, and we make everything line up absolutely perfectly so that we can, manipulate things and see what's going on. But our simulations don't always match real data analysis. And so I'm trying to think about my simulations and how to make them more plausible. For example, that might be like using a misspecified model, because in reality, we know that researchers are probably never going to find the perfect model for their analysis. And another thing that I've been trying to think more about is just bigger picture issues. So rather than thinking about what I can do in the context of a single study, thinking more along the lines of a broader literature. So kind of going along with that open science theme, thinking about how I can think about my study in a broader, bigger picture literature, how I can contribute to a more interpretable literature, thinking about things like questionable research practices and heterogeneity, and how all of that gets tied up into our statistical analyses. So a lot of just thinking a little bit more realistically and thinking a little bit bigger picture perspective.
Yeah, that the whole term of questionable research practices, or in management and organizational psychology, we've adopted the acronym of QRPs, and those have gotten a lot of interest in some very influential publications over the past couple of years. So you've been teaching students for a while, and graduate students particularly. And I've wondered whether you reached any conclusions about kind of the things that they really struggle to understand. Like, what's one of the hardest concepts that you teach?
Well, if I was saying something really basic, I would say p-values and confidence intervals are always tricky. I like to start out my semester and I give the students a quiz on what you can say about a statistically significant result. I give them plenty of options to choose from, and unbeknownst to them, only one of them is correct. And every year I show them all of the options that they selected, and it's usually things like, oh, the probability the null hypothesis is true, or the results are due to chance. But I use that to introduce them to the actual more complicated definition of statistical significance. And the other thing that I would say that gets misunderstood, and I've kind of fallen victim to this too, is that if you make a good method, researchers are going to use it. I think there is a pretty big disconnect between the methods that are in like the statistical literature and then what applied researchers and management and psychology are using. And so I think when we develop new methods, we really have to think about how can we make this so that somebody can pick this up and actually use it and use it correctly? So that might be making software to go along with it, or writing a tutorial, to teach people how to use it. I think, we can't just make up a new statistical method that works great. We have to think about, all right, how can we get people to start using this in their studies? So yeah, those would be what I would say is tricky concepts.
Yeah, well, certainly those types of that kind of emphasis is really important because, in my area and most of the areas that I know about, if you look at the practices that are recommended by the experts versus the way they are used and whether they're being used, even in our top substantive journals, there is a real disconnect there. So that type of work is really important. So can you give us an overview of your presentation tomorrow?
Yeah, I'll be.
It's going to be a week from tomorrow.
Hopefully not tomorrow. I'll be ready for it next Friday. I'll be talking about sample size planning in the context of linear regression studies. I'll be focusing on two different types of sample size planning for power, and then briefly on sample size planning for accurate estimation as well, because our goals as researchers differ. So we need different ways of doing sample size planning depending on what those goals are. And I'll be focusing a lot on using prior information in our sample size planning and using that so that we obtain appropriately powered experiments and regression studies and all of that. So should be lots of applied examples in there showing you how to do these things with software as well.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, just a couple other questions, sort of more personal. So I asked you how you got to where you are. Do you have any sense of what you would be doing if you hadn't made that switch?
I've gone through several phases, where I wanted to be different things. When I started college, I started as thinking I would be an English major. Did not think about taking any math, so ended up doing something very different from that. And if I backtrack even further, I wanted to be an actor on Broadway for a time. I went through an interior design phase where I watched a lot of HGTV. So I think in parallel universes, there could be many different versions of me doing many different things, but definitely glad I found quantitative methods and research methods. I think it's been a good fit.
Well, you're certainly having a lot of success. Hey, my last question, the past few years have been so challenging with the pandemic, and I'm always interested in how people cope and survive and the special things that the adaptations, things that they do differently that have helped them get through. How has it been for you?
Yeah, it was definitely an adjustment, especially, learning to teach through Zoom and then, some of the changes for in person and figuring out how to work from home more, all of those things. And for a while, I think it was difficult because there was no separation between my work environment and my home environment. And so I would just sit at my computer all day and then get into bed. But as we've been in this pandemic for longer and longer, I've really tried to make a time when I close my laptop and I physically go out into another room. And I've watched a lot of the Great British Baking Show. It's very relaxing. Those judges are very kind. And that's been kind of a nice thing to help me get me through some of the stress.
Yeah, well, we have enjoyed watching that as well. So, as I said when we were chatting before we came online, it's just going to be a real treat having you give a webcast lecture. and another person from Arizona State, great tradition. And so, and your topic is going to be of great interest to a broad group of our audience. So again, that lecture that Samantha is giving next week is part of the CARMA Webcast series. You can find information on CARMA at our website. I think it's karmattu.com, something like that. And so thanks a lot, Samantha, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you so much. I'll look forward to it.
Okay.